all been muted upon entry, but we want this webinar to be as interactive as possible. To help with this, we will be using the polling feature of GoToWebinar here. Please contribute with your responses. They will be anonymous, and they'll help cater us to what we speak about today. Also, at the conclusion of the webinar and upon exiting, there will be a short survey. We appreciate your input on this webinar and any input on topics for future webinars. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. To do so, type your question into the question window, and we will have Rob, our RFID certified moderator, answering the questions throughout the webinar. We can refer to him as our RFID Roberator. There will also be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We have a large group, so if we cannot answer all your questions, we will be sure to connect with you one-on-one in the time following the webinar. Finally, feel free to keep this conversation going on Twitter by tweeting us at TEKLYNX using the hashtag TEKLYNXRFID. Okay, so with that being said, let's get into the agenda. So today we're going to do a brief introduction, not only of TEKLYNX, but of your presenters, myself, Nick Recht, and Dave Kane today. We're then going to talk about RFID. We're really going to share what it is and a few different types of RFID that are being used. We're then going to talk about why you should use RFID and some of the tangible benefits that can come from an RFID implementation. We're going to spend a minute or two talking about the differences between traditional barcoding, which you're more than likely doing today, versus an RFID implementation that you very well may be considering. We're then going to talk about how TEKLYNX can help you with your RFID implementation, and do a quick recap, and then end with a question and answer session. So just to introduce TEKLYNX a little bit, many of you may know us from our brand names of LabelView, Label Matrix, or CodeSoft. We are the industry leader in label design software for all levels of labeling complexities, which is why we have those different brand names that you're probably familiar with. We are a global organization distributed in 120 countries throughout the world with local support for all of them, by over 1,500 resellers. We do have 620,000 different end users worldwide, which gives us a very large footprint to pull information from to make our software that much better. And then last about TEKLYNX here, we serve a wide variety of different organizations, everything from life sciences to pharmaceutical companies to general manufacturing to food manufacturing. We cover the whole gambit. So that's a little bit about TEKLYNX. Let's talk about that handsome gentleman you see on the screen right now. That is myself, Nick Recht. I am the Enterprise Product Manager here at TEKLYNX. I am a born and raised Wisconsinite. Currently work at TEKLYNX, which is based in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin. I went to college at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with where I earned my business degree with a focus in managing information systems. And I have 6 years of experience in the AIDC industry. And unfortunately, I'm a pretty large Brewers fan, and it's a tough season for them so far. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to my co-presenter, Dave Kane, to introduce himself and get things kicked off.
Thank you, Nick. Again, like Nick has said, my name is Dave Kane, and that picture on the left is the more handsome David Kane. I am the Label Design Product Manager here at TEKLYNX. It means I am responsible for all of the label design applications that TEKLYNX offers, which of course includes the CodeSoft application, which is what we'll be focusing on a little bit in regards to RFID today. In all, I have around 8 years of AIDC experience, spent mostly at TEKLYNX here, and really gained a lot of insight and experience with the company. I do have a GS1 certification as a GS1 Certified Standards Professional, which basically means I know more about barcodes than I ever thought I would. And while I've always thought I did have a decent knowledge in RFID, as of this morning, I actually have a document or an actual piece of paper verifying it. I received an RFID Professional Institute Certified Associate's diploma this morning. So exciting to actually finally be able to say I have that certification, and why I'm here today to talk a little bit about RFID. All right, so great. Before we do get started with the actual content of the webinar, like Nick had mentioned earlier, we do have a few polling questions we'd like to provide to you and gain a little insight or feedback from you. To begin with, the first polling question is, when do you plan to implement RFID? So I'm going to go ahead and share that here for you. And please go ahead and take a moment to share your thoughts. All right. So there are a couple different options here, either 0 to 6 months, somewhere between 6 and 12 months, sometime past 12 months. You either already have implemented RFID or currently you have no plans and you're just looking to learn a little bit more about the technology and see if maybe you can help guide any plans in the future. So we do have information or results still coming in, so I'm going to give it just another moment here as we continue to watch that number rise. All right. Kind of slowing down a little bit here, so
last chance, submit your answers. We're at 71%. I think we can get to 80.
All right. Leveled off here looks at about 70, 72, 73%. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out so we can, all share in the results. So let me go ahead and share that out so everyone can see. All right. So a very large percentage say they have absolutely no plans at this time to implement RFID, and that's totally fine. It's great to have you here, and hopefully the discussion we can have today and the information we can provide can help guide any future decisions. But then outside of that, there's a pretty even distribution between sometime in the next 12 months or even further. So, it's great to have everyone here. Hopefully, the information we can provide can really help, gain some insight on how RFID is used, how the technology works, and some of the benefits it can provide. So, great. Well, thank you, everyone, for providing your feedback there. We'll go ahead and close that out so we can continue on with the presentation here. Okay, so to get started, we want to ask the question, exactly what is RFID? And I guess one way to do that is to just literally look at the definition of what RFID is. And RFID is an acronym for radio frequency identification. And basically, it is the wireless use of electromagnetic fields to transfer data. And it's usually done for the purposes of automatically identifying and tracking tags attached to objects. So great, that's the definition. Kind of detailed, and it doesn't really clarify all that much. So what does that really actually mean? Well, to start with, RFID in reality is just a very small chip attached to an antenna that is then used for communicating data through wireless signals. The information itself is really just the technology itself is really just an evolution of barcode technology, and for the most part, the data that's usually encoded in an RFID tag is really kind of the same information that's encoded in a barcode, or historically has been encoded in a barcode. It's not new technology by any means, and while it is definitely gaining more attention and definitely garnering a lot more interest, the technology has been around for decades, going back as far as World War II. The technology actually started or came from an adaptation or an evolution of radar technology at the end of World War II. So technology has definitely been around for a long time, and really it's just starting to really gain a lot of interest as of recently. We're seeing lots of new webinars and infographics and websites that have specific attention paid to RFID, and even conferences dedicated to it. There was a dedicated RFID conference just last week in San Diego. Really, really great information, and learned a lot there, and in fact that's even where I got my certification. So if you were there, maybe we ran into each other. Really, really valuable, lots of information out there, and the growing interest is really driving the evolution and the growth of the technology. And just to kind of actually see some concrete numbers in regards to that, in a recent survey that was done by GS1 US, the Global Standards Organization, they actually polled both manufacturers and retailers of apparel and general merchandise products. And in that poll, they asked, do you have any plans, basically similar to what we just saw, any plans to currently implement RFID or sometime in the next few months or even years? And of the poll respondents in manufacturing, 88% of the respondents said that they had plans to implement RFID within the next 2 years. And likewise in retailers, 87% said they were going to implement it or had plans to implement it within the next 2 years. So some really, really significant numbers. And while it is a little bit of a departure from who's actually attending today, that is, the results that GS1 received from just a general poll. So really, really impressive numbers, and really does do a good job of indicating exactly how much interest there is in this technology. And just to share that survey with you, or the results of that survey with you, there should be a link pasted into the chat window at this point that you can click on, and will take you to a handy infographic that was provided by GS1 that actually indicated all of the information that we're referring to today. So great. We talked a little bit about what RFID is, so then we also have to talk about the different kinds of RFID that exist. Primarily, there are two major types of RFID. There's what is known as active RFID and passive RFID. To start with, we'll talk about active RFID, which is RFID tags that are battery operated. These are tags that actually have a battery-powered source to help amplify the signal or the broadcast of information. These tags have the ability to broadcast out information on their own and broadcast it to a relatively long range. This is where we're talking at least 300 feet, if not even further. Really, really broad range obviously means that it does have a relatively high cost associated with it. Both the battery-operated nature of it, the composition of it, and that long range means that these tags can cost anywhere from $15 up to $100. So a really high per tag cost for each one of these tags. And because of that, this type of RFID tagging is really best used in what's known as a closed circuit environment, which basically means the tags may go out, they may go somewhere, but they're going to come back at some point. Those tags will be reused and repurposed. So in addition to that, very commonly used on very high value items, because the very high value or high cost of the item being tagged obviously offsets the relatively high cost of the tags themselves. Just a few examples of how active RFID is used in car dealerships. This is a great example of a way that RFID can be used to quickly and accurately tell the location of something. In a basic use case of car dealerships, they actually put an active RFID tag on every single car on their lot. Then, when it came time to find a specific model, a customer was interested in one specific model, they knew exactly where, or at least they could find out exactly where that car was on their lot. No more wandering the lot trying to find that car. They just basically read the field and find out exactly where that car is. So a great example of how these tags are used in a car dealership. Same thing, auto manufacturing does a great job of showing the progression of a car through the manufacturing process. Patient tracking, obviously when we're talking about patients and human beings, those are extremely high value items. So definitely offsets the cost in that case, and it gives it real-time accuracy, real-time location tracking of patients. Great example in babies. You may have seen this in hospitals. You really, really want to make sure you know exactly where a baby is at all times when it's in a hospital. So that RFID, active RFID technology allows that. And any other general asset management, especially high-value assets, obviously great benefits come from putting these really long-range, high-accuracy RFID tags on them. Now, one other variation outside of active RFID, without getting quite into passive RFID, is something called semi-passive RFID. Semi-passive RFID is very similar to passive RFID, which we'll get into, but it does have a battery-powered backup for a sensor of some sort. The sensor can be used to monitor, say, vibration, stress, or temperature. A whole range of different sensors that can track information and then encode it into the tag, which can then be read later. Great example of this is in transportation of pharmaceuticals. Those pharmaceutical products may only be able to be kept in a specific temperature range. So they want to make sure they can track the temperature range that those pharmaceuticals pass-through in transportation. When it arrives on its location, they can read the tag and get all that information. That gives them a very clear idea if those pharmaceuticals were always kept in an acceptable range. So there is another example of not quite active, not quite passive, but a blend of the two. Now, something important to point out about these two types of tags, they're not really the focus of TEKLYNX. TEKLYNX does focus primarily on passive RFID, so for the focus of what we're paying attention to in this webinar, we will be paying attention mostly to the next topic here, which is passive RFID tagging. Now, passive RFID tagging does not have its own dedicated power source. It uses what's known as induction power, which basically means the reader or the interrogator, when it is placed next to or in relative proximity to the RFID tag, it's able to use induction power to send power to the RFID tag, which then powers up and has the energy it needs to then broadcast information back to the reader. Now, this is important with passive RFID. This means that a passive RFID tag cannot be read unless a reader is placed in the vicinity first. It does not have the ability to broadcast information out. And because of that, they do have a relatively short range, typically under 10 feet. Now, commonly, that's a pretty long range. And the distance it can be read from does depend on the signal strength of the reader or the interrogator. Commonly, it is a little bit lower, somewhere between 5 or even down to 3 feet. But it does have a relatively short range in comparison to, say, those active tags. But along with that, they do have also a very, basically a relatively low cost per tag, especially comparing to those active tags. Prices as low as about 15 cents per tag, which is really significant when you compare it to those active tags of $15 to $100. Now these types of tags, because of their low cost, are really, really best used when we're looking at high volumes of product. If you've got hundreds or even thousands of items that you need to tag, these low-cost tags are really the best option. Just a few examples of this are general item level tagging. If you have thousands of different varying items and you need to be able to identify, track, or count, or whatever, every one of those individual items, those passive RFID tags are definitely the way to go. Again, pharmaceuticals, not necessarily for that temperature tracking, but maybe just for pharmaceutical identification or counting, inventory counting. Having an individual tag on what can be thousands of different pharmaceutical products definitely makes more sense to be using these passive tags. Also, passports. I mean, we definitely know that there's literally hundreds, thousands, millions of passports out there, and the process of opening up a passport, reading the information on the passport, or even trying to scan a barcode that has the passport information in the barcode, very time-consuming. So being able to either wave a reader near it or have a person walk through a reader will automatically read that information and really decrease the amount of time. And of course, obviously, a large number of passports means low-cost tags. Great idea. And finally, a great example, which is actually displayed in a great example of this was displayed in the quotes that were rotating at the beginning of this webinar. If you happen to notice, there was an example of a bookstore or a book manufacturer, a company by the name of BGN, and from their stock counts alone, they were spending over $255,000 annually, and that doesn't count the amount of the man hours that they were spending. So, in addition to all of the money they were spending just on paying people to be there to count, they were spending over $250,000 each year. Switching to an RFID solution meant no more manual counting, no more bringing people in, and no more once-a-year inventory updates. Very inaccurate way to do inventory with localized readers and an RFID tag, a passive RFID tag on every single book. It gives them the ability to accurately get an inventory on demand, pretty much immediately. So great examples of passive RFID in all of those cases. Again, I just want to reiterate for what we're discussing here today in regards to how TEKLYNX can help and what TEKLYNX can do in regards to RFID. We are really focusing on passive RFID. And if you do have interest in learning a bit more about the active RFID tagging or even the semi-passive RFID tagging, we're happy to put you in contact with some of our value-added resellers. our value-add resellers, while they do focus a lot on our products and how we can help with passive RFID, they are also very well versed and very well educated in the active and semi-passive tag types. So we can definitely help if there's interest in those. But for the remainder of this webinar, we will be focusing mainly on passive RFID. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my co-presenter, Nick, here, so he can talk a little bit more about why RFID can help.
Well, thank you, Dave. So as mentioned, if what we've talked about so far is hidden home, but it's hidden home more in the active or the semi-passive side, let us know and we'll be happy to get you in contact with one of our great value-added resellers. So I know for me, when I talk about why we should use something, I really like to tie it back to the tangible business benefits that can come from the use of a technology. So today, we're going to use different industry use cases to tie the why RFID back to those tangible business benefits. So the first side of the business we'll look at is manufacturing. So let's talk about the use of RFIDing in anti-counterfeiting efforts. So for anybody out there who has counterfeited a product before, which I hope there isn't many, you know that it's very easy to recreate a visible label. You can recreate something you can see relatively easily. One of the real benefits of RFID is that you don't necessarily see it on the product or necessarily in the product, meaning at that point it becomes relatively hard, nearly impossible to counterfeit. To tie that back to the tangible business benefit, less counterfeit goods out there means more real goods, which ultimately leads to more sales. And this is a great use case in the pharmaceutical and life sciences space, as you may be aware that there is quite a bit of counterfeiting going on in that industry. So the next why I like to talk about is the idea of an electronic proof of delivery. So I'm certain that many of you have ordered goods off of Amazon or a website that ships through UPS, and you've gotten that awesome text message while you're at work saying your package has delivered and you do have a package on your front porch waiting for you. If you apply that to manufacturing, it's something that is really enabled by the use of RFID. Many times, large manufacturers that are using RFID are tagging their product or tagging their pallets, and when that product is sent to the distribution center or to whoever they're shipping it to, it is passed through an RFID reader or waved over by an RFID wand to be electronically received and send that electronic proof of delivery. Now, if you imagine what that process was prior to the use of RFID, a user taking boxes off a pallet, individually scanning each one of those boxes with a barcode reader and potentially scanning twice, maybe taking a few seconds to scan each box, replaced with a process that is very, very automated and potentially happening just when those goods are passed through an RFID-enabled door. It allows for that electronic proof of delivery and really increases the receiving accuracy. So the benefits of that are really the time saved and the increased accuracy. We all know time is money, and we all know that there is definitely a cost associated with errors, whether it's an error in receiving or an error in what's going out. They can really be eliminated by the use of RFID in this process. So the examples do range way further than that, but we do only have an hour today. So that's what we'll talk about on the manufacturing side. Let's shift gears and talk about on the retail side of things. So the stats we're about to share with you are pulled from the GS1 RFID survey that David mentioned, and our moderator, Rob, also known as the Roberator, has shared via the chat window. So know that these stats are founded by a recognizable organization. So the first stat is the reduction in inventory count duration, 96%. So that's a big stat. You may know, if you've ever worked in retail, that there's the dreaded weekly or monthly night where they fully staff a store, pull in a lot of people to manually count all the product, not only on the floor and on the shelves, but in storage waiting to be populated on the shelf, as well as the distribution center. When retailers can replace this manual process with an automated one using RFID tagging, they can significantly reduce that time, in many cases up to 96%. Dave shared the stat about the book retailer who saved over $250,000 a year. This is one of the most common and most sound use cases for RFID in the business today. So I think you can imagine there the tangible business benefit being the time saved, the money saved, and we'll really focus on this a little more after we share the other stats. So now you're a retailer and you have your inventory in control with the use of RFID. Nobody's manually counting things. Your products are tagged and the shelves have readers on them that all communicate and either keep a live inventory or trigger an inventory count based on the push of a button. Now let's talk about the empty shelves. If those shelves are RFID tagged and the product is RFID tagged, you can have a notification system that will notify you as soon as you have an empty shelf. An empty shelf can be fulfilled with the inventory you have control of now that you've RFID'd your entire inventory count. This reduction in out-of-stock inventory directly affecting sales is something that has really hit home for me. I have a 3.5-month-old little girl at home, and where I do love her very much, I'm not in the business of rocking a baby for 12 hours throughout the night. I came home to find my wife in sheer terror because our baby swing had broken. At that point, I made the executive decision to race to the closest retailer and buy a brand new swing. I was shocked to find that the local retailer that I went to, although they did sell the swinging monkey swing I wanted, didn't have it because they were out of stock. At that point, I had to drive several miles up the road to purchase a $135 item from the next retailer down the line. The only reason that retailer didn't get my business was because of an empty shelf that probably could have been resolved by having the stock available due to better control of their inventory with RFID. So you can see there that having good control of your inventory and having good control of your empty shelves ultimately leads to an increase in sales for a business. Now, there's a few things I want to bring up around the tangible benefits of RFID that are really just general statements about the technology in itself. First being the benefit of speed. When you implement RFID, you're replacing a technology, typically barcoding, that requires a line of sight and a visible scan that can, maybe take a second or two, with a technology that can be scanned even though it can't be seen and can be scanned hundreds of items at a time. Right away there, that makes things go a lot quicker for you. Time is money. The next side of it is really the analytics. Whether it's in manufacturing, retail, pharmaceutical transportation, or any imaginable case of RFID, the fact that you're tracking goods on the item level, not only getting information about where they are, inventory counts and whatnot, you can really tie that back to any kind of analytics you do, whether it is in manufacturing to see how many goods in process are in a certain spot at a certain time to optimize lean manufacturing initiatives, or in retail to help you recognize that in springtime we sell more purple shirts, and when we sell more purple shirts we sell more purple shoes, so in springtime we're going to put a nice big end of shelf display with purple shirts and purple shoes. Those analytics can really help to drive more sales from you and become that much easier to gather with the implementation of RFID. So today we talked about what RFID is, and we talked about some of the tangible benefits of it. Let's spend a minute talking about and really just driving home the differences between traditional barcoding and the use of passive RFID within a business. So traditional barcoding is very, very well established and very, very globalized. Because of this, it has a very, very low cost associated with an individual label that you may be printing a barcode on, many times as low as half a cent to 1% per barcoded label. It's globalized, established presence. I'd place a bet that almost everybody in the audience today could find something on the desk or the room they're sitting at that has a barcode on it. Now, in order to find that barcode, you do need to look at it, which is one of the disadvantages of traditional barcoding. It does require that line of sight. The next thing is you can only identify with your eyes one barcode at a time, and that goes the same for a scanner. A scanner can simply scan one at a time. It can do it at a very high speed and very, very efficiently, but ultimately, in the world of automation, it's a manual process that could be potentially more automated. So now let's talk about passive RFID and some of the differences and really look at it from the angle of automation. I don't want to use the automation word too much, but if you've ever attended a webinar I've presented on, I'm really big on automation and many times recognize that automation is something that's throughout many businesses and their heavy machinery and their processes and is ignored a bit on the software side. And software can help, and RFID is really just an extension of that. So with passive RFID, of course, with the great benefits you'll receive from it, there is a higher cost. Typical cost being anywhere between 15 cents to $2 per tag, which is many times very, very justified by the benefits that are driven from it. I want to mention that this is an emerging technology. It's very widespread, but it's still growing. And with that, this price is going to be doing nothing but driven down. The price of labeling, for example, started out not as high as the price of RFID, but started out a lot higher than half a cent to a cent per tag and has been driven down over the years. Now, something that may have been obvious based on what I've said so far, but big benefits of RFID are the fact that it's radio-based. There isn't a line of sight required, and you can scan hundreds of items a second. So let's just share that example of receiving goods in the inventory and manually scanning one item at a time. Even if you do that and each one takes 1 second and you do it 1,000 times a day, that's 1,000 seconds that could be replaced very easily with the wave of a wand or the automatic scanning of goods based on RFID. So we've shared quite a bit of knowledge with you. At this point, we want to launch the second and final polling question of the webinar today, which is for our audience today, people listening, which is quite a few. Do you see areas of potential improvements in your business through the use of RFID? So that is launched. Please contribute with your response, and we will address the answers here when they're done. Oh, we're growing quick. The poll's been open for 10 seconds, and 39% of our audience has already answered. I'm pushing for 80%. We're at 52. So if you're there and you weren't paying attention, now is the time to answer this poll. All right, team, we're 30 seconds deep, and we're 66% voted. Let's keep them coming. Do you see areas of potential improvement in your business through RFID? Okay, we're at 73%. Keep the answers coming. We're going to leave this open for 13 more seconds, no matter how awkward the silence gets. 6 seconds. Last chance to vote. Okay, 74%. Not quite the 80, but you got to leave room for improvement. So let's share our answers. Not surprising, based on the polls done by GS1 and what we've talked about today, majority of our audience, 65%, can see areas of potential improvements through RFID. That's great to hear, and we're here to help. So if there's anything you feel TEKLYNX can do for you, let us know either in the survey at the end or via the questions here, and we'll be certain to follow up with you. 5% of you said no, which is fine, and I hope you still got some knowledge from the webinar today. Of the 31% of the audience that is still not sure, we're more than happy to spend additional time with you to do some evaluation to see if RFID could potentially help your business. So now that we've gotten through a lot of the overall general knowledge sharing portion of this webinar, we want to continue on, pass it back over to Dave, who is our product manager and resident expert on RFID and the TEKLYNX RFID products, to tell you why and how TEKLYNX can help with an RFID implementation.
All right, thank you, Nick. Yeah, and again, we've talked a lot about, all the things that RFID can do and how it can help, but, why are we here? Why are we the ones that are talking about it? So I guess the question is exactly why should you consider TEKLYNX to help out with this? Well, first of all, like I said, we're talking about passive RFID here, and with most passive RFID encoding, we're talking about passing smart labels through a thermal printer of some sort. In the case of TEKLYNX, we carry full support for most common and even some uncommon thermal printer manufacturers. So chances are, if you have a thermal printer, an RFID-enabled thermal printer, we're going to have support for it. And in addition to that, a full support of all the current RFID technology. And of course, this full support is because of the extensive support we have in the thermal printer technology, I should say thermal printer support. Basically because the RFID technology that is available is directly dependent on which printer you select. So with that broad printer support, we of course have a very broad support for RFID encoding in general. So this is a quick example of the actual RFID implementation page in the CodeSoft software. So this is the label page setup tab, and you can see there is an RFID RF tag, I should say, in the bottom left-hand corner that, when you select, displays this specific screen. Very simple, straightforward screen with a list of options on it, starting with the specific type of model RFID tag you'd like to select. In this example, we've got an EPC tag selected, and then below that you see all of the different options that are available for configuration purposes, which include, of course, the size, the location, the position, even what image you want to use to represent the tag on your label design. So a whole variety of different options available in regards to configuring the RFID tag, but in a very easy to use and straightforward interface. Now, I am going into a little bit about the CodeSoft software at this point and showing some screenshots of how RFID is used, but I'm not actually going to get into a physical demo of the software at this point, just kind of doing a high-level overview. If you did want to see an example of how to add an RFID tag to your label, we do actually have a very helpful video that was recorded. I actually recorded it, so you'll hear my voice again. And there should be a link pasted in the chat window from our helpful moderator, Rob. I'm not going to say Roberator, but anyway, he'll be pasting a link in that chat window that'll take you right to that video, so you can definitely take that link down and watch that another time if you'd like. So again, just to reiterate, it's a very easy to use, simple interface for adding and configuring the RFID tag, and then of course the next step is encoding the RFID tag. And this is the second screen. After you've added the tag, you want to obviously be able to define what's encoded in the tag. And in this screen, you can see, again, very simple, straightforward input screen with the option to encode data in a number of different ways, including straightforward ASCII information, so just regular text, hexadecimal information, which is more commonly encoded into RFID tags, and even a predefined structured input, which basically provides you a list of options to be able to select what kind of tag encoding or what standard you want to use, and then prompts you with input fields for each of the necessary components for that standard type. You can see in the screen to the left an example of an SG-TIN RFID tag and the structured input or the prompts that are listed below it. So here we are, just another screenshot of that same interface with the drop-down enabled, so you can see the whole variety of different standard types that can be selected and structured inputs that can be chosen. Really helpful common standards. The SG10, like I mentioned before, for serialized global trade item numbers, GRIA, SGLN, and even the US DoD or the Department of Defense are RFID encoding standards. So all of these standards very commonly necessary when communicating or delivering RFID tags to different organizations. So it's very easy just to select it from a drop-down list and then be prompted for the specific input fields for each item. And of course, because you are going to need to populate those different components, it is very easy to link variable information to RFID tags. There is another column just to the right of that list of different standard types to see a data source column. The data source column is where you can very easily just select from an existing data source that you created on your label at some point previously. When I'm talking about different variable options, what do I mean by that? Well, maybe you have a database connection that you want to pull information out of, and you want that data to be encoded into your label. I'm sorry, not only your label, but into your RFID tag. No problem with that. Perhaps you need to have a unique value, serial number, for instance, and that serialized number needs to increment up after every tag or every label. No problem putting that into a tag. A prompted user input, so perhaps you want a user to be able to type in a value, and whatever they type in, that information is then encoded into a tag. Or perhaps you need to take that information and manipulate it and extract out certain parts or perform some sort of formula or calculation to result information. Very easy to calculate out that data and use that in your tag. And of course, what could be the most important, the option to be able to capture data. Be it perhaps maybe information from a scale, like a weight of some sort, or you're scanning a barcode and you want the data from that scanned barcode to show up in your RFID tag. No problems with that whatsoever. Information very easily can be captured and used in the encoding of an RFID tag. So just a real quick example here of what an RFID-enabled label looks like. So a smart label, right in the CodeSoft design interface. You can see there, that's the standard shipping label. And you can see that, I guess, in addition to the very clear RFID tag that's displayed about 2/3 of the way down, there's also a number of other aspects to it, including barcodes. Now, there's no expectation that the day you implement RFID is the last day you'll ever need barcoding. So it does make sense that if you're designing a label that has smart RFID technology, you also want to be able to have the other technology, existing technology you might be using, like barcoding. So full barcode support and RFID support in the CodeSoft software, and you can see a very straightforward design-like interface to easily place and configure different fields, including your RFID tag. Finally, we do have an example here of a label that was actually designed, then printed out of the CodeSoft software. And what I'm trying to make sure to point out here is the fact that you don't see the RFID tag in the actual printed label. And this goes back to sort of like what Nick was talking about in regards to counterfeiting. Even though you can see the RFID tag and where it's going to be encoded when you're designing the label, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to see the RFID tag when it prints out. And for this example, I have a designated area to show, hey, there's a tag here, but you just can't see it. You don't have to do that when you're actually designing a label. That information can be printed, or that RFID tag can be printed right over. So you can utilize 100% of that real estate on your label design and still encode RFID information in the background. So great, and I do just want to reiterate that the screenshots that we're seeing on the left-hand side of the CodeSoft software, that is our CodeSoft 2014 Enterprise RFID software. So if you don't have CodeSoft right now, or you're not familiar with CodeSoft, or perhaps you have an older version of CodeSoft, you can definitely get up to the new version or even evaluate the new version by going to our website and downloading a trial version. Again, Rob, our moderator, should be putting a link in the chat window right now that will take you right to the location to download a trial period and test out the most current version of CodeSoft and see the same thing that we're seeing in these screenshots. So, great.
All right, so let's spend a minute recapping what we talked about today, and then get into the question and answer section. Session. So we started by sharing with you information about RFID, not only the very technical definition, but we tried to make it a little more understandable, and we talked about the different kinds of RFID with active, semi-passive, and passive. We then tried to illustrate in a tangible business benefit method of why a company may want to use RFID. We then compared the traditional technology of barcoding versus RFID, and then we shared with you how and why TEKLYNX can help. So that's what we talked about today. Let's spend a minute reviewing the questions and then get into addressing some of them in front of our audience today. So give us just a moment here to expand our question pane and review them. Many of these may have been answered throughout. All right. First question I see, I have an RFID project. I need hardware and everything beyond the software. Can you provide some recommendations on where I can get these? We absolutely can. We work with a very extensive group of value-added resellers that are experts on RFID and would be happy to put you in contact with any of them, not only to take care of the software side in which TEKLYNX can offer, but also the hardware side and consumable side in which they do.
There is a question here that says, do you have an RFID tag that can be applied to a metallic surface? There are, and it sounds like you have a little bit of background information on that. There are some surfaces that RFID tags do have difficulty being read upon. Metal surfaces and liquids are common areas where that does show difficulty. But there are RFID tags that can handle this. They're usually specially formatted, and depending on what needs to be done, sometimes it does impact the cost of the tag, but definitely there is technology available. And again, that's not something that we specifically provide, but we can definitely put you in contact with some of our value-added resellers who can probably assist with that.
All right, give us a moment to review.
We do have quite a few questions here, so we may not have a chance to get through all of them in the time we have, but please be assured that if we do not get to your question, we will try to follow up with you after the webinar has concluded.
So here's a good one for you, Dave. What does passive RFID provide that a barcode doesn't?
A great example for basically passive RFID is, again, going back to that need to either individually count or individually scan a barcode, plus the need to be able to actually see that barcode. RFID tags can be embedded within materials, inside of boxes, inside of actual physical materials, so they don't need to be visible, and a person doesn't actually have to find that tag and read it. And in addition to that, you might not even need to have a person reading. A great example I've seen in a manufacturing facility or a receiving facility was objects that were tagged, and they had the readers on the forklift that picked up the pallet. So nobody's trying to find a barcode, nobody's trying to scan a barcode. They just drive up with the forklift, pick up the pallet, and those readers instantly read all of the tags on that pallet. So really the benefit is efficiency, and you don't have to worry about trying to manually identify or manually scan any barcodes.
So we see here, can we review the cost of tags? For the participant who asked that, we would be happy to pass your information along to one of our value-added resellers that can definitely discuss that cost associated with it. And is RFID checkout friendly with POS software? Same gentleman asked that question. It certainly is. There's obviously different hardware associated with it, but that is something that can interface quite nicely, just like barcoding software.
That's a great example where we did, take some time to show some very solid examples of how it's used in retail and in manufacturing, but there really are dozens and even hundreds of different implementations that can help with efficiency. Basically, if you can think of a way to make the indirect reading of information or the automatic capture of information valuable, you can use it to make yourself more efficient or your company more efficient.
So being radio frequency, are there large opportunities for interference from outside sources or potentially theft of information? Yes, that is a risk you run, but same risk that you run with a barcode from the theft of information side of things. And there's a lot of things you can do to encrypt that data to make sure you're the only one that data means something to.
Yes, one of the strongest recommendations with RFID and encoding RFID information is that you tend to encode a license plate of some sort. So the information that's actually in the RFID tag by itself is not valuable or relevant to anyone other than the person reading it, because there's a system on the back end or a database on the back end that links the license plate data in that RFID tag to a specific product or a specific result. So there is, of course, with RFID always the potential for someone to be able to try and read from that RFID tag, but using the information appropriate or encoding the information appropriately can definitely help with that. In addition to that, the variety of different tag types can help limit the amount of access someone else has. So a low frequency tag is going to have a very, very short range, whereas higher frequency tags can reach a little bit farther. So if you're really concerned about it, you make sure it has a low frequency tag on it, so someone has to get very, very close to the tag to be able to read it.
So we see one here, RFID tags are a chip and antenna. What are you referring to about printing RFID tag on a label? Is it just a unique RFID serial for that tag? So many times the RFID technology is complementary to the barcoding, so the RFID tag is simply embedded in the label you're printing a barcode on. It's being used both at the same time.
Sorry, here while we reevaluate or look at a few of these questions. Like I said, there are quite a few here, so. One of the questions is, I have label view. Can I take advantage of RFID capabilities? Unfortunately, the label view software itself does not have RFID technology available in it. So if you are using the label view software, the good news is you can easily transition to the CodeSoft software. The CodeSoft and label view applications are intentionally designed so that the labels created in label view can come into CodeSoft without any necessary changes. So a very easy transition to come from the current version of label view into the most current version of CodeSoft. And even if you are using older versions, those versions can also be brought forward into the CodeSoft software. So unfortunately not available in the label view software, but there is a very easy transition and an easy upgrade path to get to the CodeSoft software, which does have the RFID functionality in it.
And we're just reviewing the questions.
All right, there is a question that says, how can it help us with inventory? We did touch on this a little bit, so I'll just try to reiterate a little bit more. A great example, at least in retail, of inventory is if every product has an RFID tag on it, you can put stationary readers on every shelf. And then there's no need to have people come in and count or actually try to manually figure out how many of each product there is in store. So all they have to do is basically walk up to a computer, push a button, and it'll tell them a live count of everything that's in their inventory, where it's located, and how many are available on each shelf. So very quick, immediate, almost instantaneous delivery of live inventory data.
All right, we might be running short on additional questions.
Yeah, I'm looking here, and I can pretty much assure that we're not going to be able to get to all of these questions. There's quite a few here, so we'll try to do just a few more. The question says, we already have CodeSoft and already use thermal printers. Other than readers, are there any other hardware needed? As long as the thermal printer is capable of encoding RFID technology, that is important. Not all thermal printers can encode RFID, but as long as it does support RFID encoding and then the readers to capture the data, the only other aspect of RFID that's important is some sort of system in place to manage the information. So we can encode the information, but the capture of the information and the relationship between, like I said, a license plate identification of a tag and then the actual information or the data that's related to that tag, and of course the analytics that go along with it, that's going to be the only other component. As far as hardware is concerned, nope, that's pretty much it. You need something to encode the tags itself and then something to read.
Can you use RFID with TEKLYNX Central, or is it part of CodeSoft? That's a great question. As the Enterprise Product Manager, I'm happy to let you know that you can definitely use RFID with TEKLYNX Central, as the label design engine embedded in it is CodeSoft. So we're going to wrap up the questions we're going to address publicly right now, but our moderator, Rob, also known as the Roberator, will be on here answering questions. So if you have additional ones, feel free to stay on, shoot them out. But in respect for everybody's time, that's where we're going to wrap things up today. Thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate you listening to the things we're extremely passionate about here at TEKLYNX, RFID being one of them. Please fill out the survey upon exiting. Let us know how we did today. Let us know if we had too many ums and ahs, or if the content was useful, as well as anything you'd like to hear us talk about for the future, as we want to make sure that what we're bringing is valuable to you. There is our address and phone number, so feel free to send us a letter, just like it's 1930, or send us a phone call or shoot us an email. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye, guys.